Jen Rydell. I teach in northwest corner of Washington State in Bellingham, and I teach at a public alternative high school. Most of my career was taught at a small rural high school out just at the Canadian border. And there I taught traditional classes, and I decided I wanted to work with kids that struggle or think they struggle but need a different path to learning. So I currently teach at an alternative high school where we try to focus on PBL, project-based learning. A lot of our kids have, like many of you have in your classes, high degree of trauma and ACEs and don't necessarily come ready to go. So, and obviously with remote, we're, like many of you, we're doing remote learning. So last year, that's how I think Gabriel kind of took notice. I was given the opportunity to be the teacher in residence at the Library of Congress as their civics teacher in residence. And the goal was to try to curate resources that they have that would be helpful for teachers. If you've ever spent any time on their site, I don't think it's a shocker to say it's really hard to navigate. It takes time. There's some great gems there. So even though this is a completely old school list of what I did, I want you, particularly those of you that are doing US history, my guess is if you're a new up and coming teacher and you're just earning your wings, you know the value, I hope you know, of using primary sources. And I think everyone on this panel probably does. But the Library of Congress does have some curated, gathered primary source sets, so you don't have to spend your time trying to find them. And I've listed it there as that's the first. I'm not going to try to click back and forth to the website because my experience in webinars is that doesn't work too well. But there are primary source sets, and the thing that the library has that I think is helpful for you as a teacher, even remotely, is they have these primary source analysis tool guides. And so we know we look at a picture differently than we look at a text or the written word, or we look at even a sheet music and the lyrics on that. We look at that differently than we listen to an oral history. And so if you are trying to get your kids to figure out what happened, what is this narrative telling us about events and people of the past, you can use those as tools. On the third item down, if you're seeing my screen, and I know it's small, the Library of Congress, if you remember nothing else, just go to loc.gov/teachers. And on that page, you can click to primary source sets. There's a blog, and the blog is intended to help you, the teacher, get a sense of how you might use particular items or strategies with primary sources. And I wrote a blog that I was hoping to be useful, and I hope it was and is, for how could you use those primary source sets that the library already has together on various topics with your kids and do those remotely. So those are some tips. A couple other things, and I'm not sure my time frame here, but I want to make sure I honor everyone else's expertise. In terms of, and I'm really speaking to primary sources, another resource that I had never interacted with until this year is called Primary Source Nexus. And they are actually, like I heard one of our panelists talking about, they're actually supported by the Library of Congress. And they do a phenomenal job of curating through the Library of Congress and assembling also groupings of primary sources on different topics and different grade levels. I'll be honest, I'm going to teach an entire unit on American identity in our moment in time. And I want kids to be thinking, how have we answered the question of what is an American in the past? How are we seeking to answer that now? How do different people answer that? And so I contacted them and said, do you have a curated set of items that could show over time how people have answered that question of primary sources? And they didn't, but they actually put it together. So if this is something that interests you, go to Primary Source Nexus. It's all free. And they actually have a set that they're featuring right now that they put together. And I'm excited to use it with my kids. The Library of Congress also has, if you're a civics teacher, even though I know we have some civics experts too, that's my background mainly, congress.gov. You could use with kids in remote settings. It's not just facts and figures about laws. There's some videos you can use with kids to help explain processes. You can have them investigate information about their current representatives and senators. And so I'd recommend doing that as well. I'm going to hold off on, I'm not sure what the plan is for others. So I think I'll go ahead and stop, Gabe, unless there's a questions or if you would like me to continue.
Okay, any questions from audience members? I'll be adding the resources right now. New teachers, any questions? Thank you for sharing the resources.
Thank you for sharing. I was going to say, especially the what it means to be an American. Right now, it's a question that my students are answering, so it'd be cool to include the primary sources.
Yeah, they were, if you look at that and think, I don't even know what they're talking about here, like Primary Source has right on their main site, they have a little way you can get a hold of them. And I mean, I had the luxury of having met them face to face in my position last year, but I believe they'd be equally responsive if you just emailed them right off the site. And they have and what they're doing really well, while the Library of Congress tends to be more dated historical resources, they've been curating things that are representing our moment in time. So they have things dealing with George Floyd. They have things dealing with the marches. And then they juxtapose that with older historical items. So your kids can see how people in different time periods exercised, protest, and what did that look like. So I'd be excited to see what you can do with that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so speaking on civics, we have someone who's going to be running for office, Madison Teacher on Twitter, Joe Schmidt, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Gabe, as always. I did not put together any sort of formal presentation. I just started dropping some links into the chat box. My name is Joe Schmidt. I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. And I always say my #1 job is to remove barriers for educators. And part of that is to be collating resources so that when you need something, you're not out just like Googling things. So in the chat box, the first thing that I put in, and I can actually just give you the empty URL. Here's everything. So I use Digo to bookmark. So the one I just dropped in for you brings you to 4,200 bookmarks, which is way too much. But the first one that I put in at 738 are things that I've tagged as primary sources because that was just what we're talking about. So that's the link that'll bring you to the search in there. That's 239 things that I've bookmarked as primary sources. But you can cut it down. So for example, in the next one, I did primary source plus US history, and that narrowed it down to 25 links. And then I did almost 100 webinars this spring and summer related, which usually impresses people, except for Gabe, which Gabe probably did about 400 webinars this spring and summer. But then I've built professional resource pages where I've started to group them. So that page there, it says, here are our webinars that I did or hosted. So those are all the ones that are related to using primary sources. I think 4 of them are ones that I did, and then I had other groups come in. And then the here is my best of, I have a document titled, let me just bring back to the home page. So I keep a document that's not as active as I would like it to be, or as updated as much as I'd like it to be, but it's just called my current social studies online and tech-based resources. And so this one's sorted. This is kind of my go-to list, my best of the best. I try to move back over onto this list, although like I said, I'm not keeping that up to date. And then if we wanted to talk about a specific content area, for example, history, I have strands from my Maine Department of Education page. And you can check out either civics and government, personal finance and economics, geography or history. So I always, when people like email me or we're in a webinar and we're talking and they say, what do you have for resources? I ask them how much of the fire hose they want at any given time, because my DOE page will have like 10 things for history. That's it. Like those are the ones I say that I will spit out to you as I trip down the steps. If you ask me while I'm falling down, like those are my absolute go-to. The current online tech-based piece, I try to limit to like that 20, 25, like it's really good, but the list is starting to go out. And then my all-time big list, again, is just that Diigo. Every single thing I bookmark. And I tell people, you have access in, you can search for it as long as you understand how I might tag things. So I might say Japanese internments, and you might say something else, right? Like it will only come up in the searches that I would use. So you can see as you navigate the tool, if you put in primary sources, on the right-hand side, it starts to tell you, well, are you looking for elementary, literacy, social studies, civics, Black history, Maine, maps, geography? You start to see some of the different stuff, so you can start to add in and sort, because it does sort down very, very quickly. But again, that's something that I say, like, this is the everything. So if you just want 2 or 3 things, Joe, what am I doing? I tell you to go to my DOE page, look in the history strand or the civics and government strand. You might want to check that online resources tool one. Again, that's a little bit dated. That was super active about 2 years ago, that before I started rebuilding all the web pages for the department. That was kind of my go-to list. And then if you just want the absolute fire hose of every single bit of information out there, you can go into my Diigo and you can look for, again, anything you want. But you're starting with 4,200 topic, or 4,200 bookmarks. And then it's up to you to try to figure out, well, are you looking for elementary school, middle school, high school? You're looking for primary sources, U.S. history. You're looking for World War I, World War II, Civil War. You're looking for civil rights, where it'll start to narrow things down. And it does if you get to be very specific and you say, well, I'm a middle school teacher who's looking for primary sources for World War I. At that point, you're probably already just down to 2 or 3, right? So that's your targeted piece. So if you feel comfortable navigating that system, then like that's the way to go. But otherwise, if you kind of want it handed to you, then there's those other lists. So that's what I always say I do. I sit around in a room trying to find every single little bit of information on Twitter, the web, everything else, and then I collect them. And then when, whether it's a new teacher, whether it's a veteran teacher, and somebody emails me and said, Joe, I need help with X, I just go to my own list. So I welcome those lists are open for you to search as well. And ask me any questions, reach out to me on Twitter. I feel I'm relatively responsive. If you tag me in a tweet, to go ahead and respond with anything that I might have. Then again, I did all those webinars, and I don't know if anybody right now is looking for more time on Zoom for more webinars, but here we are having this conversation. But I, again, did go through and collect all those webinars. Again, state, national, teachers, leaders, organizations. I see Nate McAllister, he did one for us as the Gilder Learman 2010 National History Teacher of the Award. He's under tips and tricks from amazing award-winning teachers, I think is the category in there, so you can see that. And so you can just meet those teachers. And I know I believe this discussion kind of started coming about, like, where can you find things online? And there are top-notch, high-quality, free resources out there, as long as you understand where to look for them, how to look for them, and then who to talk to. Because again, I think we're at a point when I do professional development, I warn people that I think now the idea of just Googling something probably is no longer helpful, because there's so much stuff out there and nobody wants to click past the first page on a Google search, that you're going to get lost and buried if you're not exactly sure what you're looking for. So just the amazing thing about Twitter is we are all here to help each other. And I will get off my soapbox now. And yes, hashtag vote Joe NCSS. If you're an NCSS member, elections open in November or in December. I'm trying to unofficially make Gabe my vice president and chairman in chief of social media campaigning. So whatever we can do to get the vote out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. You got people responding, vote for Joe, so awesome. Okay, so since he was mentioned, Mr. McAllister, Nate, if you're ready, continuing with the U.S. history.
Well, holy cow, there's so many things you can dive into, and Joe covered a lot of those. I think partially exploring, and Library of Congress is one that I send my kids to a lot, and I understand it's a fire hose, but at the same time, I want my kids to get their hands dirty and struggle a bit. So I like the idea of them playing around and searching through Library of Congress materials. I love Chronicling America. I think that's a wonderful website, by the way. If you've never been to Chronicling America and played around with that, it's just it's a lot of fun. And I've had kids find so many things on there that, you know, you normally wouldn't come across. I used it this summer for the pop-up history Gilder Lehrman classes, and just did, you know, just a quick, I wanted to compare, I know this seems obvious now, but I did a comparison between the Spanish flu and what we're going through right now. And it was amazing, the similarities, the anti-maskers, the whole idea that, you know, miracle cures, that kind of thing. There was even a quinine miracle cure back then. So using that is phenomenal, and letting kids play around with those things. But I think if you're getting out, and it depends on what you're in. If you're in the world history, but if it's just U.S. history, I really do think, and Joe has these on there, Sheg and Facing History and Ourselves, Gilder Lehrman is phenomenal. And all of these places are continuing to develop materials. But one I would highly recommend for anybody, veteran, new, old, whatever, is going to your small local county histories from time to time, and doing and calling them, or not you. Don't ever, you never call. Have your kids call, because they'll bend over backwards. They'll do flips and twist themselves into knots to help little kids or bigger kids. If you call, they're going to hang up. They're going to say, you know what, you got to pay us, or you got to do this. I mean, they may not. They'll be nice about it, but they're going to tell you, hey, you're an adult, get it done. But if a kid calls and they think, oh, holy cow, I get to help a kid with a project, they'll do amazing things. I've called a little county historical society in Pennsylvania. I had a kid call there one time, and they sent they scanned like whole books of stuff, of materials they had, and just sent it to the kids free of charge. I think they probably spent 12 hours putting it all together, but they'll do it. So I think those are resources that are usually not, and I don't know, don't come to the forefront. We don't think about them, but they're there, and they have a plethora of materials that are just sitting there waiting for somebody to ask about them. Now, granted, you may get the 85-year-old that wants to talk for an hour and a half about, you know, the piece of mail they got the other day. But that can be fun too. I mean, it may take you a while, but it can be fun. So I think those local history sites are great. I think talking to your National Park Service people, especially right now, because they're bored to death, and getting them involved in classes. Talking to historians. I know finding historians on Twitter and asking them questions, holy cow. Sometimes those people will do amazing things to help you out. Michael Nyberg from Carlisle Military School in Pennsylvania, he talked to a couple of my kids doing a project for 2 hours. They were late to class. I got in trouble, but whatever. And you wouldn't think about it, but the kids got a lot out of it, because they're talking to, some big time historian, and I get to feel like I've done something heroic, and the kids think, oh, he's really cool. But no, I think you just need to find those little niches and those places that you wouldn't normally find things. Your local history centers, your state history centers, talking to historians, those are all resources. And because I don't want to steal Joe's thunder and Jen's, because they're talking about these great sources as well. These are things that we don't normally think of. I think cemeteries, going to cemeteries and hitting headstones, not literally, don't do that. But having kids run around a cemetery, which you can, I think I might be able to finagle a cemetery field trip this year, because you can social distance everywhere. So that might actually work. But getting the kids to do some research locally, doing some local projects, and civics, holy cow, the best project right now is to get your high schoolers, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, to go to work the polls and get them trained and get them going, and work with your National Honor Society, your civic engagement clubs, whatever it is, and get those kids going, because those are some ideas that some projects that, one, the kids can do. They're going to get paid, and you're going to be helping out. So those are awesome. I think everybody needs to be doing that for their high schools. And the middle schoolers, get them going to board meetings, city council meetings, and getting them engaged, getting them involved in some way. Have them write legislation and get that done. Have them write a new amendment to the Constitution. I had a kid do that one year, and she saw our senator in the airport, and she cornered him, and she wouldn't let him go until he said something about whether or not he was going to help her with her constitutional amendment. He finally got out of it and said, "I don't know what you're talking about," which was true. He had no clue. So those things, I think those are things that we, the sources and the activities and the projects that we can get involved in and get the kids excited, because they're going to take ownership in what they're doing, and let the kids drive a lot of this, and have them take the lead, especially when it comes to getting those sources. And and somebody's putting on there, changing names of schools or monuments or whatever it is. There's lots of local things you can get done right now. And you guys bringing each other into the classroom. I mean, having Joe come and talk to my class about government would be just phenomenal. Or Kara Lee coming in and talking about, I don't know, Kara Lee can talk about anything. And having her come into my classroom, or having Adam come in and show us some of the primary sources, those little projects that he does. I don't care if it's with middle schoolers. We did a breakout EDU today, a digital one for third graders, and I had high schoolers that had a problem with it. So it was a hoot. There's so many things we can do right now, and opportunities digitally that getting the kids engaged. Or Saw Cow Lake. Yep, we can do that too for Civil War. Thank you, Kara Lee. Way to throw me under the bus.
Okay, so awesome. Thanks for that. So looking at Kara Lee, are you ready to go? Well, I'm adding the link still.
All right. I agree with everything Nate says. Anything Nate says, I agree with, always. He's my partner in crime. So I'll just have like a few. So if you know, or you follow me, if you follow me on Twitter, you know what I like. I like to share. So California State Parks is really awesome, and they're expanding stuff. So you can do virtual field trips with them. And so I've taken my students to Angel Island, which they call the Ellis Island in the West, but it's really not, because it was not so welcoming. It was more of a gatekeeper. But I've taken them, and there's on Gabe's resources. Angela and I led a whole group to Angel Island together with the Social Studies Network. So, but they have different places that you can visit. They're developing more resources. They're working on 360s. Aaron in charge of the California State Parks Sports program is really great, just really innovative and stuff like that. Another cool resource is Facing History. So they have great materials. They have workshops and stuff like that. And some of their workshops might be kind of pricey, but they have program associates, which I didn't realize. And so I was talking about, what am I trying to figure out what I'm teaching, la, la, la. And my friend goes, why don't you contact a program associate? I'm like, okay. And so I'm like, can I invite my colleague? Sure. So she met with us, we Zoomed, we told her what we were looking at, what areas we were looking at, and boom, she starts popping resources in the chat, and she goes, okay, I'll come back to you with this. Of course, I was saving them in my Wakelet as I was going, but she goes, I'll come back to you, I'll share these things. And so she gave us an annotated list, exactly what we wanted curated. So that was really cool. So like Nate said, SHEG lessons are really great. I love Thinking Like a Historian, because that's giving them the framework for world or US history to think. So if you follow me on Twitter, you don't have to, it gets tiring to follow me, but there's a lunchroom fight where the principal is trying to figure out who did it, and really the evidence isn't that good. And really my AP came and looked at it and goes, no one's guilty, but they're all like getting them on circumstantial evidence. But in my office hours, I talked to a kid, I go, okay, so because mom said this and dad said this, if you were the kid, do you think you should be suspended for this? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, so you need to have more evidence. So it's an awesome lesson. And then really, my last really awesome share is what I do for U.S. history, what I do every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. I meet with Joanne Freeman. She has a little history community she's developed. Nate's been there before, and she talks history. So she's a Yale professor. She's the Hamilton professor, if you follow her on Twitter. I'll put her handle there. But she takes a document from back in the day, and a primary source document. She talks about it. She helps us to understand it. Today we talked about the election of 1800 and godless Jefferson, and then she connects it to the present. So she gives us tools to help us understand the present. And this was her 21st week of us meeting together with her. It's really awesome. She doesn't teach on Thursday, so she's going to continue it on. So that's just exceptional. If you can do it, you don't have to go see her live, though it's really great. But you can also watch the archived conversations too. So that's the last share that I'll give you. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, Liz, you're up. You're on mute.
When I'm not in the teacher starting it off, I always do that, so forgive me. Whoa, wait a minute, hold on. Really? I do use Zoom. Goodness gracious. Okay, so I had shared in the Wakelet, there are some links that I had shared that are in there. And so one of the things I have in there is this Padlet that I have of US Gov and civic resources. So some of these things can work for both Gov and Econ. The Constitutional Rights Foundation has a lot of amazing what they call Bill of Rights and Actions, where they have short readings. They'll have questions to get the kids thinking at the end. And sometimes at the end of their lessons, they'll also have like little simulations or activities that they can do. Also, if you're wanting to have your kids engage in civil discourse as they're going through US, or if you're doing a Gov class, they also, Constitutional Rights Foundation has some awesome civil conversation lessons, structured academic controversy lessons, where they have a reading and then they have a protocol for how your kids go through and discuss and have discussions on topics. One of my favorites for videos to be using with students is Annenberg Learner. They have amazing, amazing videos to use with your students. And oftentimes in some of their modules, so they have like a US set, they have Gov set, they have Econ sets, and World History sets. But they'll have a topic and they'll have a video, but they also have nice discussion questions. And so one of the things for our new teachers, I want to offer you to consider when you're packaging your lessons is my kids are really loving how I've been setting them up, wrong tab, in a slide deck. Some people call them like hyper slides, digital slides, whatever you want to call them. But I'm using the 5 E's method with my students a lot, where you're going through like your lesson plans that you've gone through with your credentialing and your certification at your states, where you have your engaged, your hook, getting the kids in, explore and explain something, go deeper, evaluate, and then come back as a whole group. And so here's just an example where I had taken a lesson and I have my learning intentions, loving my John Omerode with that, but then having something to engage the kids and have the kids thinking about something. I had a Mentimeter in there. Then the kids are going to go through and take a video. And so this is where, if you're using one of the videos from Annenberg Learner, or there's lots of other places that have amazing videos that you could use, or the PBS videos or the We the Voter videos, you can embed the video. And I put like a little TV here, and I put the questions next to it. So as the kids are watching the video, there's a space for them to take notes. Sometimes I'll actually put a specific question above that I want them to then answer. And so we just really did a 4-week poll, what are working? And a lot of the kids said they like having the lesson on slides versus having them on doc. So some of the kids actually were calling out how this lesson type was structured and shared out to them. Then the kids are going to be doing something. So the idea where you can put the lessons and instructions, and you can also put arrows telling them what to click and do, but this just is a nice way to package things for students. And don't forget our UDL, giving the kids option where they could read, they could watch a video, or they could listen to something. Then the kids were taking a look at John Lewis And so there was something where they could read, but also on there was a podcast with somebody talking about and reading the article to that. So that's just something to consider while you're also planning your lessons and taking resources from a variety of places. Over here in California, at USC, they have a center called USC Dorrance Life, and they have a program called Callus. And they have a lot of wonderful teaching resources for US and World and Gov and Econ. Like, they spread the curriculum. And you can go into activity database and search by topic. And in a lot of their activities, they have a student handout, but then they also have a teacher guide. In some of the activities, they also have a very interactive PowerPoint. And so that's something that you can use to help your students and to take parts of it and digitize it if you want. But everything is in Google Docs. I just switch things over into Google Docs, or I'm sorry, they're in Microsoft Word. I switch it to Google Docs or Google Slides. They also have this great conceptual framework that I love. So I know some schools use Grapes or Persia or whatever. They have a 4 worlds, and then they have a couple more on here. I like this because it's very easy for my kids to quantify and identify topics to connect to the different historical themes, concepts, whatever word you're going to use for this. But we call this our 4 worlds. So I know at my site we're supposed to use a SPICE acronym. I tell my kids, here's the department handout, here's what we're using. Because these categories are also the world in which factor that the USC Callus activities are also going to refer to. And these topics and subtopics are way more accessible and quantitative for my students to make those connections to the 4 worlds of history. And then we also have the other 2 over here. So it's really 6. So that's one thing I love for US. New York Vision Schools has great lessons. Like, nothing against if anybody here is from New York. These are great. I wouldn't do this in distance learning. That's the other thing. You're not going to be able to cover everything. We're going to have to identify what are those big ideas that you're going to focus on and hound those in with your students. And so these lessons would have been nice for like a face-to-face classroom and all that. But what I like about the New York Visions lessons is how sometimes they'll set something up, they'll have a video and questions. They have primary source with questions there. So I might take some of that stuff and use for an opener, use it for a closer, and wrapping things together where we take a look at a topic. Now let's look at a primary source and wrap it together with something from that lesson. So that's one other thing to consider. You don't have to use all of a lesson plan that's packaged from these websites. Feel free to, I call it break it. Break it and take different aspects that are going to fit your need. Especially some of these lessons you'll see might be 3 or 4 days, really with distance learning and having to condense onto big ideas and topics. Take what you can, break it, take an aspect out, take a primary source and a question and hound in on a skill set that you want to do with students. And with skill sets, have fun with it. So one of the things I like doing in class is using children's literature. So earlier this week, we were taking a look at the Glorious Revolution, at cause and effects of the different stages of the Glorious Revolution. And cause and effect for my sophomores, and as a department, we had achievement team meetings, and the kids kind of will get things mixed up. I needed to find a way to help make it more clear for my students. I told the kids, okay, we're gonna have story time. And I love children's books, but I can't read in the class like I would. So I found a read aloud for If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. So I would play If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, play a little bit, pause. So why did the mouse want that glass of milk? What caused him to want the milk? Oh, he had a cookie. Wait, why did the mouse ask for the broom? Like, oh, because he cut his hair and they need to clean it up. And so pausing and taking a look at elements in a story to get the concepts in something safe that the kids can understand, and then get into content and apply that same skill. But now you're doing it with historical evidence. So I've done the same when I taught econ with tops and bottoms for opportunity cost. The giving tree for at times the tree provided a good, at times the tree provided a service. So there's fun ways that you can bring children's literature. And then there's lots of little children's books about different events in history. So when we get to the weapons of war, we look at weapons and instruments of war, because I also bring in animals And so there's I think it's an Atlantic article that we'll use. And I'm like, there's a picture of a bird with a camera. I'm all, this is your first drone. And the kid's like, what? I'm all, yeah, it's like a drone, but it's an animal. But then there's also a story of a dog. And there's a children's book called Sergeant Stubby. And then reading that before we get into it. So find ways to bring the joy and have fun with the curriculum as well. So here's a bunch of different lessons and things that you could use. The Reagan Library has some awesome stuff as well. There's a ton of stuff for you to go in there. But one of the other things, and I'm going to give a shameless plug as being a board member of this, is the News Literacy Project, and I'll stop. Media literacy is so important, not just as a skill set, but also the kids are spending so much time on the internet. We have an election coming up. There's social media feeds. The SIFT is an awesome way for teachers to get lesson ideas on things to use, breaking down media literacy, what are false rumors going on. They have lots of stuff that you can easily take and have a brief conversation with your students. We also have a media literacy curriculum called Checkology. It's free. It's free and works perfectly in distance learning. Now I'll stop talking.
Awesome. Thank you for all of the resources. Miss Ingold is going to show, briefly show her website. And since we don't have any other U.S. history teachers after that, we can transition to world after that. She has resources for both U.S. history and global studies. You're on mute.
You're not the only one.
You're on mute.
Okay, I think, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Now, remind me, Gabe, how I'm supposed to do this, because you know I'm not good at the...
At the bottom where the share screen tab is.
Okay. Okay, so lots of resources, lots of really great stuff. If you're anything like me, when I'm sharing things with my students, especially their parents, I want to try to put everything in one spot because I think that that's really helpful, especially in the virtual world, to have everything you know, in one place. So this is my website. It took me about 5 years to build it, but I'm always, you know, adding and playing with it. Oops, sorry about that. My computer kind of has a mind of its own here. But one of the things I wanted to show you about this is not only a great place to take all these wonderful resources you've heard about tonight and house them here under different tabs that you can create for different things. But I also wanted to share with you, I came across this over the summer, which I thought was kind of cool. This is actually called Flip Snack, I believe. And what I did was I took it and I made what I called social studies survival kit with it. But the neat thing was I figured in the virtual world, I have all these tools and tips and tricks that I use with my students normally throughout the year. And I wanted to take them in the virtual world and I wanted to put them in one easy, accessible place that they would always have that they could access. So I introduced my social studies survival kit, my handbook, on the first page of my website. And what I did was I created a tab over here. So when you click on the tab, it actually takes you to, oops, wrong tab. This thing has a mind of its own. That's Survivor, different thing. Here we go. So what I did was I called it What Works Best for Social Studies, Student Editions. You can see they've got their laptop and all their resources here. And what this is a program where you can actually create flip books. So you can design your flip book any way that you want, and then you can take all of your content. And I actually made mine look like a hardcover book, which is sort of cool. But what you can do is you turn the pages in the book, and you can put this on full screen too, as well. And then students, parents, you know, anybody can access this book, and then you've got all of your information here in one great place. So it's great for everyone because it puts everyone on the same page, literally. And it's a nice quick reference guide to use for all of those great things that, you know, you have that you use in the classroom that maybe you want to use in conjunction with all of these great sources that everyone is sharing. So that's called Flip Snack. It's pretty cool. You can play around with it. This is what it looks like, where you can go and you can actually create a flip book. I did that flip book for the Social Studies Survival Kit. And then I also came up with one for parents. So going back to my website here for just a second, housing, talking about, housing everything in one place. So up here at the top, I have a parent tab. Again, it's always great to have everything organized. So you can go and you can tell your kids, okay, click here, go here. And here's another flip book, which actually I'm planning on making more of. So I'm having my parents subscribe to a newsletter if they want to take one. So you go down to the flip book. Again, you can make it full screen. And then here I've got, all sorts of information that explains my visual schedule, how to use my website. You can actually put links in here. You can put hyperlinks in here. You can put videos in here. So it's really sort of cool to take a lot of the stuff that you want to, throw out there to kids, to parents, and put it all in one spot. And, like I said, having it in one place on something like a website is certainly helpful. And this particular website builder is called Weebly. Many of you may be familiar with it. I know there are tons of website builders out there, but I know for virtual learning, this has been a huge, I know everyone uses Google Classroom now too, but this has been a huge asset of mine. And I sort of use this in conjunction with my website, with Google Classroom. So in between the two, it creates like a nice environment for the kids and their parents, especially if you teach special ed kids or struggling learners, visuals, repetition, having things in more than one place. It's very helpful to the kids because they know that they've got different places they can go to find resources and to access tools if needed. So 2 cents. Gabe, how'd I do?
You
5
did
minutes?
great. Thank you for the info.
Sure.
And the resources. Okay, Angela. Now we're transitioning to World. Miss Lee. Mute.
I'm doing the same as everyone else. Hello, I'm Angela Lee. I teach outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and world history is my thing. There's so many. I was just looking through the Wakelet to see what's shared, and I don't think I have a lot of new resources to share there. So I wanted to actually talk a little bit about, and I see the other Joe Schmidt is here too, about the idea of bridging historians and teachers, and that's been something that he and I were going to be presenting at NCSS, so not anymore, and making that connection with scholars, and I think that's really, really important. So there's been more and more discussion about K through 16, right? The importance of that from or pre-K to 16, all the way through, and to see what kind of through lines there can be in terms of building those historical skills. And I just think that is really, really important. And even finding a mentor to help you bridge those gaps, I think that is pretty critical. And I was really, really lucky when I first started teaching. And so that's one part is, it's hashtag bridging historians and teachers. It's really long, but it's been a way for me to connect with a lot of people. And then finding scholars online are so, some of them are so generous, but also finding an organization. So for me, it's been the World History Association. And they're one of the academic associations out there that actually include teachers. So in their constitution, they have to have at least one on their board. So I am currently on there, and it's been such an amazing experience, and helping me connect, really, because what we're doing, and some might say, well, what do they have to gain? But what we're doing is helping set the tone and the skills and everything, because those are the students they're gaining, right? So more and more scholars are seeing the importance of sort of bridging that gap. The other thing about world history is that it is huge. It is so big and so overwhelming. And I wanted to maybe calm the fears of new teachers, that you don't have to like take it all. It's like a fire hose, right? There's just so much out there. Like this summer, I've been teaching 22 years, and this summer I finally got around to taking a course on modern African history, because that's an area that I know nothing about. I really learned a lot. And to just take it, 1 year at a time, it's a long-term commitment. So for me, what was really important in setting up my teaching is to try to find a framework that you feel comfortable with. And I wanted to show you very briefly. This came out of Project Zero at Harvard University. Can you guys all see that? And the 4 domains of global competence. And even though this didn't come out until about 2005, after several years after I was teaching, there's still a lot of resonance today. And we talk a lot about, civics and global citizenship, and how does history tie in with that? And all of these things sort of link together. And there's different models of that. It was developed by a scholar, researcher in education and history. Her name is Veronica Mencia, and I have just found this to be really, really helpful in terms of framing how I approach teaching. So everything that I bring in, everything I'm producing, I'm trying to see how does it fit into this framework. And if it doesn't, then those are things that go out, right? Because there's no way to cover everything in a year or even 2 years. I teach a 2-year sequence, 9th and 10th grade, and there's just no way to do that. So to even have some sort of conceptual framework for yourself as a teacher, but even so for students, and I know Liz already brought up, using like Persia or Spice or whatever. I use pieces now. It's very similar to what Jennifer just talked about, and I actually use puzzle pieces, and it corresponds the same way. P is for political, I is for innovation, et cetera, et cetera. And then seeing how those all sort of tie together in terms of understanding the world. So coming up with a sort of a narrative of global history. And the last thing I wanted to say is about the whole movement, like I know in a lot of people's minds about anti-racist teaching, and how that seems to be applied very, very much in US history. Everyone's seeing the direct application. But that is something in terms of world history that I think world historians need to be more explicit about as well. And it's cropping up. It's coming up. It's actually another hashtag, decolonize world history or decolonizing our curriculum. And that is sort of the final thing I wanted to think about. And then 2 resources that I think, because Liz has this amazing Padlet, there's 2 resources and they're organized. One is an organization and one is more newish. It's only been started beta testing in December, but I thought to point this way, and I'll send the links to you, Gabe, later. One is an organization called Primary Source. And they're a more regional organization, but they do a lot of training. And the reason why I wanted to point to it is because they have amazing, like free resource guides, free library, and they've been doing global and world history for 35 years. There's free online curriculum, there's free online seminars. You do have to pay if you want to take the modern African history. I just took through them. You do have to pay if you want to take a longer institute or course like that. But I wanted to share that, and full disclosure, I am one of their advisors. And then finally, this is new. It just started beta testing in December of 2019. It's called World History Commons. And it's an amazing resource. It got an NEH grant the year before, and just in terms of sources, like all of the different kinds of sources for world history, for teaching. They have teaching modules and different teaching source collections. So I find this is a place I'm going first now if I'm looking for anything in particular. So those are the few things. And I'm gonna stop share. And that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the resources. I've added them, and I added Liz's world history resources as well. Continuing with world history, Joe, if you're available.
Are we back to me, Joe?
I think the other Joe dropped off.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Any other world history teachers to share out? Okay, great. So any other resources to share or questions from Nate?
Yeah, one resource that I keep forgetting to share this is the National Humanities Center has some amazing resources, tons of primary pieces that you can use. Some are pre-excerpted for your classes, so there's some really good stuff there. And by the way, one little quick share. This was my first day of school today. Had a kid come to class online with no clothes on. That was fun. So I hear this. He gets online and he goes, "Oh," and he goes offline, and then he comes back and he goes, "I forgot to put my clothes on." You know, it's 2020.
Yes, it is. For a few more months at least.
I was just,
Go ahead.
can I say something, Gabe?
Mhm.
I know we just were on the tail of world history, but for both US and civics, for years, and a lot of us here probably have used or encountered street law, but street law kind of helped raise me up as a baby teacher. And while I was teaching civics and law and society and US history, I've really tried to use anything, because what they produce is just good. The case summaries are in Word format, so you can modify them for kids that might need some assist. And don't think, oh, I'm not teaching law, so I can't use them, because what they just did this year, and I put it in the resources that Gabe already listed on the Wakelet, they got a grant for the Department of Education for Maryland. And what they did is they wrote case summaries on historic cases for middle school curriculum. And then they found primary sources from the Library of Congress and other places to complement that. So you're giving historical context, a lot of the SHAG type skills, the Stanford Historical Educational Group type of historical thinking that some of you might be using. So they've created these, and they could be easily used in a high school class too. And so I just personally, I go and see what are the new case summaries they've written. Could I use it for current events? Could I use it to hook to a historical event? Could I use it in my civics class? Anyway, so I know we were on the tail of world history, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention street law. They've kind of raised me.
Great, thanks. Okay, so Joe's been having faulty internet. You ready? Are you available? Or
yeah, I think I can talk for just a couple minutes. So I'm not sure what's been said, so I will keep what I'm going to say very brief, and so I don't repeat what anyone else has said. I do want to echo one of the things that I heard about kind of working with and connecting with historians and scholars, and I would add to that, and if it's been said, I apologize, history educators, trained history educators who are doing research in history education. Read their books. The number one thing, though, that I'm going to suggest for world history isn't a resource. It's really thinking about narrative. I think one of the problems that new teachers and old teachers, frankly, run into is that they do not really think about what the narrative is for their course, and in particular in world and global history. I know that Liz had brought up New Visions, and I'm not going to give a long critique of New Visions, but one thing I'll say about one of the problems with New Visions is there isn't a narrative there. So there are a lot of separate lessons, and frankly, that's what a lot of teachers run into as well, which is they have day-to-day lessons, but they don't think about what the stories are that they're going to tell, and then ultimately the stories that they want their students to develop. So I would suggest there is a great essay, I believe it's in this book, by Bob Bain. If it's not, it's in this one, that goes over his research about narrative and world history. I think it's actually in this one, which is a book that is frankly indispensable. It's the New World History, a Field Guide for Teachers and Researchers, edited by Ross Dunn, Laura Mitchell, and Terry Ward. I highly suggest, while it's not a cheap book, that you go out and invest in that if you're going to be teaching world history for any period of time. But really, truly think about what your story is going to be. Think about it before you go into the classroom, when you're in the classroom, and ultimately go back and revisit it each year. It will help you to make your teaching, your instruction more cohesive. And ultimately, we use the term relevant a lot right now. And there is culturally relevant, but there is also relevancy in terms of student learning that has to deal with connecting new knowledge to past knowledge and moving it basically from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. And by developing stories for your courses, you will make the curriculum pieces that you bring in more relevant and help students to connect that new knowledge to knowledge that they already have. So that's my piece. I certainly, again, I don't want to repeat what anyone else has said. Happy to connect with anyone and share other things, including some of the work that we're doing in New York City. But yeah, that's about it for right now.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so any teachers to share anything, and we can transition to Q&A. Any other veteran teachers? Okay, so looking through the Q&A, Michelle, you had a question about world cultures. What was your question?
I'm teaching 6th grade world cultures this year for the first time, and I'm at a private school, so I have a lot of leeway on what I do. I really would like to tie it in to getting the kids to think more about how culture is affecting what's going on in the world today, why people are doing what they're doing based on culture. And just wanted to know, I guess, what your thoughts are about doing that, and if you have any good ideas for doing it and any resources.
So are you examining it from like the narrative, like cultural universals, or how exactly are you going to go? Or just looking at common themes, or connecting it back to overall like modern culture?
I think I'm open to anything. My kids don't, I mean, they're 6th grade. They don't know a lot about it. They've talked about religion and stuff previously, but they don't know a lot about world culture other than what their own families experience. So like I said, I'm pretty open to anything, and I'd like to look at it in terms of things like Black Lives Matter and pride and just different main things that they probably are seeing out in the news today, and how it relates to the world and what caused it and has it happened in the past.
Great. And there's no framework? You could do more or less whatever you like, not attached to a standard, or?
Until I get caught. Yes.
Okay, great.
Michelle, one thing you might want to consider, one of my favorite classes I ever designed and got to see in action a little bit, is I don't think you could fully do it because you said it's a world cultures for 6th grade, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I did a US history backwards course, and to see the kids make all of the relevant connections to what they'd already learned about, like what was relevant. I don't know if you could necessarily do that, but I'm wondering if you curated current events topics that you knew were kind of relevant historically, and if you started the year with a couple weeks of just maybe covering a certain topic or an angle, and then letting them do a little bit, explore, get their feet wet, names, places, people, events that they're probably familiar with or might be more familiar with, that they can do a quick internet search, and you can go to like procon.com or those type of stuff and make it accessible for them, and then have them start to bucket like what are some of the themes and stuff that they're hearing. And then as you start to approach stuff, like, oh, there are people still fighting. Is this what we talked about at the beginning of the year? Yes. What's going on today has roots back to then, right? And have them start to see what's happening today is part of a really big picture. That way, when you're talking about whatever past events, it's not just some past event. it's a foundation for something that they are now aware of, and they can start to make those connections back and forth. And again, I saw it once at an alternative high school that I wrote curriculum for, and the kids loved it. They were like, it was amazing to see them do the civil rights movement. And it was during Colin Kaepernick, right? So that's what we started with. And then to hear them talk about like, wait a minute, is this like Colin Kaepernick? Yes. Yes, like they had a very relevant experience to it, and especially some of, you know, those diversity, equity, inclusion things that are going on now that are in the news, right? If you can help them start to draw some of those parallels, I think you'll have their attention immediately.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and then you might also want to consider like UNESCO or UN News Center. I know I follow them on Twitter, and they'll have a lot of different stories that you're not going to get anywhere else to bring in the class. You could go to the UN SDGs website and make those connections. So I know I'm doing thematic world with my sophomores this year, and we're doing thematic world with our units, but also connecting it to the social justice standards from Teaching Tolerance and the SDGs, and bringing those and infusing them together. So those might be ideas to take a look at, and some interesting slideshows and looking at what's going on in other parts of the world. The Global Oneness Project has some interesting modules and lessons you might want to take a look at. And
I'm sorry, the Global Oneness?
Yeah, Global Oneness. I put the name of the website in there. And then the Pulitzer Prize images from around the world. That's another good one. That visual literacy, that's going to tap the questions, maybe even do a QFT with it to get their curiosity, and then go and explore, maybe use an image to tap their curiosity, and then put together a multimedia text set with different stories from Global Oneness or UNESCO or the UN Youth Center or the UN SDGs page to further like let them go and explore and see what's going on.
Great idea. Thank you.
And I agree with teaching the SDGs, because then you can get in with like what's happening around the world, what are the connections. So say, for example, I'm working on with about 40 different teachers from different countries, including the US, and basically we're examining equalities and goal 10. And it's a list of, I think, 17, and I can send you more information and videos on that. I'll put them in the Wakelet as well.
Okay.
And information into the Google Classroom if you want to join this project. So say, for example, I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. We can look at like what inequality, like educational inequality looks like in Fort Worth, Texas. And like, let's say another class in India, you know, similar concept, but it may look different than what we have in Fort Worth, Texas.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is a huge help.
Welcome. Okay, any other questions? Or anything to share? Miss Ingold has one more thing to share. And if you want to type in the questions. She recently did an article. It's on mute.
Just figured that out. Okay. Yeah, I was just listening to the conversation, and I just shot Gabe a message and said, you know, I'm just going to share this with you briefly because you guys are welcome to read it on your own. But Middleway just published this yesterday. This is an article I did on turning what New York State calls an enduring issues essay into a respectful ethical debate. And the debate procedure was designed for middle schoolers. But I've gotten a lot of just really great positive feedback on Twitter from a lot of educators saying to me, you know, wow, this is a great article, and I think that I'm going to share this with adults, you know. And funny story, one of the regents of New York State happened to be visiting my classroom back in January, and he visited on a day when I was doing, you know, one of these debates. And he was sort of funny because he said to me at the end of the lesson, he said, you know, gee, it's funny, I can't even get the Board of Regents to talk to each other as respectfully as these 8th graders are having a conversation, especially when they're disagreeing. But, you know, I said to him, it's a process. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is if you take a look in here as you're going down, it does talk a little bit about lost civilizations and world cultures and throwing out some, compelling questions or essential questions. Like, for example, the lost civilizations, the Aztecs, Mayas, Incas, were they terrible people who did great things, or were they great people who did terrible things? And, at that point, you're sort of now inviting the kids to go out and do their research and bring that information back in order to create an argument and to present their side of it so that they can answer the question. So that was something that I did with the kids when we did a little bit of global at the beginning of 7th grade. And then as we went on into 8th grade, our conversations and essential questions got a little bit more complex. We started talking about, countries' involvements in the world wars. Were those involvements more motivated by either power or morality? And then, once again, the kids went out, and this talks about, how they did research, how they prepped for it. There's some pictures in here which are kind of neat of them, up in front of the room and the kids taking notes. And it talks a little bit about how that procedure went about, how do competing views of power and morality lead to global conflict? And again, that kind of question, even though it was designed for US, it's certainly very relevant when you look at world history. So some of these things are certainly transitional. They can go, from, doesn't matter if you're talking about US or you're talking about, world. So this just talks about the Socratic method that I use, the debate procedure, how to divide up the job so that everyone is accountable, and the procedure for running the debate between the debating team and then the fellow student debaters who are the audience, that are participating. And, in the end, really what the takeaways were for the kids and how this kind of activity is really great for them, because it really gets them, it puts them in front and center with interacting and applying all that information that we're asking them to go out and gather and talk about. And you can see my organizer I use here. My big theme is always, how do the pieces fit together? So they have to choose 3 primary sources, come up with an overall issue or theme, and then they have to present, support, and defend that as individuals and also as a group. So just sort of a fun way to get the kids involved in debate and talking, and also helping them learn how to respectfully have a conversation and how to respectfully agree to disagree, because that's important at all levels, but really important when you're a middle schooler, because, that's one of the big things that we're trying to help them prepare for when they go to the high school. So that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to post everything in the Wakelet and in the video. I will share it out in the Facebook Social Studies Network and also share out on Twitter, and I'll tag everybody. Any other resources to share? Thank you, everybody, for your time as well, and your amazing resources.
Has anyone discussed the Canada, the Historical Thinking Project? So I think one of the things, in addition to narrative, that I like to push particularly new teachers to think about is kind of getting beyond the Sheg heuristic. While Stanford History Education Group can be great and their resources are invaluable, there are other historical thinking skills, and getting students and teachers to think about those concepts, particularly some of the bigger ones that really help us to kind of, and help historians to organize the past and do analysis of the past is really helpful. Canada had, going back over a decade now, under Peter Satius and some others, developed the Historical Thinking Project, and I'll drop the link in. And they had what they called the Big 6 historical thinking concepts. And these are, you can call them skills, we can call them second order concepts. These are really some of the bigger historical thinking ideas, if you will, things like progress and decline, historical empathy, or kind of thinking about historical history and perspectives with an ethical dimension. If you have not visited them, unfortunately, the Historical Thinking Project site is no longer being updated, but it is still very useful. It kind of gives an overview to the 6 concepts. And then there are lessons. They are based in kind of Canadian history, but they can be very valuable to kind of see how to operationalize teaching those particular concepts. The other thing I would say is Stéphane Levesque has a book that is, I'm blanking on right now, that has historical thinking in the title. It's a really wonderful book that kind of gets a little bit more in depth with those concepts and gives some great examples that you can bring into the classroom to help you organize your teaching, not just for content, little C content, but really with the integration with skills. So I'll drop that into the Levesque book, I'll drop into the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, any more questions or anything else to share? Thank you again, everybody, for your time.